Now, the sad truth is we live in a post-fact world, which sucks, but there it is. And it's often said, especially in the old days of YouTube, that facts are more important than feels. This is in fact wrong and has always been wrong. And for a fairly simple reason that, if you imagine a spectrum of human decision making, you have down here all the stuff that is completely instinctive. So here you have things like breathing, which you have some control over, but not a whole lot. And up here you'll have, your social decision making stuff, all stuff that requires lots of grey thinky matter, decision, science and all that sort of stuff. And this whole thing is, of course, on a spectrum. And fairly soon you sort of come to the emotional response stuff. And the emotional response stuff is far more instinctive than the fact-based stuff. So for instance, if you hear the rustling in the bushes, you immediately think that this might be a monster or a tiger or something, and you get scared. And the fact that that there might not be any tigers around doesn't actually prevent you from getting the emotional response. And, this is, of course, where a lot of the politics actually lies, is promoting emotional responses in people rather than actually appealing to the facts. The factual messages are complicated, they take a lot of time, and if you want to get yourself elected, you just need to get the majority of the votes. So not actually that important. Now, this has always been the way that it worked. This is true going back, 100 years or so. And it's only when you get into the late arrivals on the scene, which are things like Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and you add to this the dreaded algorithm. This is where it all goes south very quickly, because all of these guys here are attention-based economies, right? Which basically means the more attention they get, the more profit they get, which means that you have to promote this stuff here. This is where the game is at for an algorithm, where you can actually invoke emotional responses, triggering the libs or being triggered, blah, blah, blah. This is the name of the game. And so you get this horrible feedback between the attention-based economy with the algorithm promoting emotional responses. And that's the world. That's the world that we live in, where facts actually become less important in this world. However, that is not this channel. This channel, we care about facts. In the light of that, this is actually going to be a corrections video of a sort, because there is a whole host of people who, for reasons, I've got this really dedicated anti-fan base, might being picked up from some of the people I've criticized over the years, feminists, Elon Musk fans, blah, blah, blah. And so, I'd be making videos on whatever, the Mars rover, not the Mars rover, the Mars helicopter, that's right. This is a wonderful example of how facts really don't matter. So I made a video some time ago about the Mars helicopter, and I looked into the details of it, and my conclusions were, this is difficult, but fundamentally not impossible, right? You could make this work. And you go down to the comments in that, and it's all, ha, you got it wrong. You said this was impossible. The fact that that's not what it says in the video at all didn't actually matter to these people, because post-fact world. Anyway, so occasionally I do make mistakes in the video. As a general rule, if they change the conclusions, if they affect the conclusions, then I'll take the video down or issue a correction. After you've been doing research for a while, you realize that with a lot of these things, there isn't just right and wrong, there's shades of grey. So you can be a factor of 1,000 out and it makes no difference whatsoever, or you can be a factor of 10% out, and it makes all the difference in the world. So let's take a look at an example of a factor of 1,000. And this goes back to one of my first Hyperloop busting videos, where I was looking at atmospheric pressure and the pressure in the Hyperloop. So this is going to be our pressure. This is going to be 1 atmosphere, 1 bar. And so that's what you're breathing at the moment. And if you go up to the highest mountains in America, you'll come down to about 0.7 bar. And that's the atmospheric pressure at about 15,000 feet, which is give or take 5,000 meters, that sort of thing. You go up to the highest mountains on Earth, places like Mount Everest, and you go down to about 0.3 bar. And that's also about the altitude of your typical planes flying. So if you depressure at this sort of altitude, you black out and die fairly quickly. Even with extended periods of training, you don't survive long. And this is why, of course, when planes depressurize, you need the oxygen masks. So it turns out what you're actually breathing at the moment is, it's about there somewhere. It's about 20% oxygen, and about 80% of it is nitrogen. So the partial pressure of what you're breathing in is 0.8 atmospheres of nitrogen, 0.2 atmospheres of oxygen. And you can live quite happily with 0.2 atmospheres of oxygen. And so if you're up at this sort of altitude breathing air, which is 80% not oxygen, this is where you have the problem. However, if you get the oxygen masks, you can survive quite happily at this sort of pressure. You go much below this, and even if it's a pure oxygen atmosphere, you're going to have a bad time. You're just going to black out and die because you're not getting enough oxygen. And the pressure that the Hyperloop was running at, or is marketed to run at, is about 1,000th of an atmosphere, which is 1 millibar. And one of the earliest videos that someone did in reply to one of my Hyperloop videos was saying, haha, you think this is a high vacuum, and it's actually a really, really low vacuum. To which the answer is, no. This is essentially indistinguishable from a total vacuum for almost every significant factor that you're interested in, most notably in the fact that there's no oxygen there. If you actually say, well, I've got 1,000th of the oxygen that I need to survive, or a billionth of the oxygen I need to survive, it really doesn't make any difference. And so this guy was making great hay out of saying, a high vacuum is 1,000,000th of a millibar or something, to which is like, duh. You might recall in my metallic water video, where we were dropping sodium potassium alloy into a vacuum. In order to even start that experiment, you need about 1,000,000th of a millibar vapor pressure before you even start. So, I mean, I'm no stranger to working with these sorts of things, but, for the purposes of the Hyperloop video, it really doesn't make any difference whatsoever. And he was saying, therefore you don't understand vacuums, therefore all of your Hyperloop stuff is wrong. Now, of course, that was years ago. It's quite often when I come out and bust one of these new concepts. Hyperloop's not a new concept, but it's 100 years old, vacuum train. And the problem with it has always been building the large vacuum chambers, which isn't something that we've got a miraculous new touchscreen technology that's going to make building big vacuum chambers possible. But, so when I busted the solar roadways at first, there was some guy who insisted that, no, I've got some academic who says that glass will make a fantastic road surface. And it's like, yeah, that didn't age so well. And likewise, there was this guy who made videos saying that all my Hyperloop busted videos were wrong. Mine have stood the test of time. His, not so much. Anyway, so this is an example where you can be a factor of 1,000,000 off, just saying this is effectively a perfect vacuum, and it makes no difference to the conclusions whatsoever. Likewise, you can actually be off by a relatively modest amount. And, so let's take heat engines as an example. So if we burn some fuel, this is going to be all the energy that we get. And of that, you can only ever turn about 30% into actually useful energy, driving your car, moving your car, that sort of thing. And so all car engines, internal combustion car engines run 30-ish percent. Diesels go a bit higher, but um, and yeah, so you might well say, well, what if we could increase it just by another 30% to 60%? And it's like, yeah, that's not yeah, this would completely revolutionize all cars. All internal combustion engine driven engines would be completely revolutionized if you could do it, but fundamentally you can't. Or likewise, if you were proposing, Hyperloop to replace air transport or something, if this is the cost of a plane ticket, and your Hyperloop costs are actually going to be 10% higher with no tangible benefits, then yeah, you're just going to be outcompeted and go out of business. So there are times when a few percent matter, and there are times when orders of magnitude don't matter. So we're going to take a look at my latest underwater Hyperloop busted video, where they were proposing that they were going to build a tunnel to run a Hyperloop from. Let's have it here for giggles and to see if I can actually draw it. So there we go. That's roughly North America. Europe looks something like that. And they were proposing building a Hyperloop tunnel from America to Europe, where all of this stuff in the middle here is going to be the Atlantic Ocean. So they had two proposals. The Atlantic, roughly, as a profile, looks something like this. Yeah, their first proposal is you just dig it under the under the Atlantic. This is the Atlantic is 10 kilometers at its deepest, and most of it's actually nearer 5 kilometers deep once you get into the deep bit. And of course, there's a huge mountain range in the middle with the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and the tectonic spreading. I mean, this thing is dead long before you even start. But their second proposal, the pressure down here just kills absolutely everything. There's a reason that we can't do really anything of worth or value on the ocean floor, to the point where the only thing that we've ever sent to the ocean floor are like little spheres with people in. That's basically, you might have a bit of infrastructure around here as a sub, but basically the bit that takes people down to depth is a little pressure sphere. And their second proposal was that they were actually going to float a tunnel just under the surface all the way across the Atlantic. And they were going to tether this to the Atlantic floor with cables. Now, those cables have to be about 5 kilometers long. And you have to bear in mind that there are no ships that can anchor in the deep sea, right? The chains are just too long and too heavy. So this is just an absolute no-go from the very start. And on top of that, you're going to have ocean currents here, and the ocean currents are a few kilometers per hour. Typical ocean currents are, 2 to 5 kilometers per hour, that sort of thing. Your fastest human swimmers go about 1 kilometer per hour. In the good old days, cargo ships used to go about slightly faster than this. It was 10 kilometers per hour, that sort of thing. And the fastest ships, the battleships, they go about 30 miles per hour. I guess that's about 50 kilometers per hour. So the big ships can actually crack along at a fair old pace. But in the old days, the ocean currents were actually really important for navigating around the planet. And it's when you take a look at what you have here. Let's put Mount Everest on here for scale. We'll have the ocean depth as 5 kilometers. Mount Everest, if we would stick it on there, he's going to go up to about there somewhere. That's going to be Mount Everest, who would be 10 kilometers high. And for reference, if this is now recalibrated at sea level, 10 kilometers is also about where our passenger jets fly. A bit short for a passenger plane. Let's try that again, shall we? There we go. It's more passenger plane shaped. Okay, right. So passenger planes fly at about 10 kilometers. So these cables you're talking about anchoring this tube to the ocean floor are going to be half the altitude that planes fly at. They're going to be massive, long, and floppy. This tube is going to be, 3,000 kilometers long. Essentially a cable that, the dimensions of a very thin cable attached to the ocean floor by very long and thin cables. This whole thing is an absolute dumb idea. It crashes and burns on every single conceivable level. Cool, so on to the guts of this video, which is what's the mistake that I made in this video. Because if I don't correct these things, it's absolutely guaranteed. When you don't make many mistakes, people will dance a little jig around every tiny little mistake that you make. Whereas, of course, if you make bazillions of them, they all tend to get lost in the hay. And as long as you're putting on the getting the right messaging on the feelings, no one really cares. But anyway, that's not where we're at here. Where we're at here is we have our tunnel under the ocean, and I want to know roughly what are the forces that are going to be pushing on that tunnel. Now, because most of us live in the air, we don't have a very good appreciation of the forces in water currents. So I wanted to translate that into something that's a little more accessible, which is what that would be like in terms of air currents as wind. So I want to know, I'm going to calculate roughly what the force is on the water from the water on the tube, and I'm going to translate that into a wind speed. What is the force on the tunnel? Make a first degree approximation that is basically the number of particles hitting the side of the tunnel. And I want to roughly convert that from a current of a liquid to a current of a gas, a wind speed. So if you take a cubic meter, that's going to be our cubic meter. And for those not from, humans on cubic meter scales, they're sort of that sort of size. So if you take a cubic meter of air, that will weigh about 1 kilogram. And if it's a cubic meter of water, it will weigh about 1,000 kilograms. And so, so you got 1,000 times the mass hitting it if you go from air to water. What's that worth in terms of energy? Okay, so we're going to have some side of the vessel here. And in the case of the liquid, we're going to have a unit volume hitting this. And of course, with the liquid, that's going to contain lots of particles, because we know the density of this thing is about 1,000 kilograms per cubic meter. And we know that the velocity that that's traveling at with the water, we said, is going to be about 1 kilometer per hour. And in the second case, we have a cube of gas, which has very few particles in it, because we know the density there is about 1 kilogram per meter cubed. And we want to know what is the velocity that that's actually hitting the side with. And, so my ballpark figures is, it's the number of particles hitting it, which is about 1,000 times by the velocity, which is 1. The density is 1,000 times lower, and the velocity therefore needs to be about 1,000 times higher. So it's going to be about 1,000 kilometers per hour, which is more or less the speed of sound. And of course, this is completely wrong. Completely wrong. Not so completely wrong. In that the energy that we're actually looking at converting here, or conveying, is the mass of the particles, which in this case is more or less the density, times by the square of the velocity. There might be a factor of 2 in here somewhere, it doesn't make any difference. And so here we know the mass is going to be 1,000 times by the velocity, which we said was a kilometer per hour. So times by 1 squared, it's going to equal 1,000. So the question is, for that to be a gas which has a density of 1, what is V? And of course, V has to be, or V squared basically has to equal 1,000. So it's times by about 30 squared, which is about equal to 1,000. So yeah, the actual velocity should be 30 kilometers per hour, which is a lot different from the 1,000 kilometers per hour I had in my original video. Now, of course, this makes absolutely no difference whatsoever to any of this, in that this is essentially a very thin cable going across the entire of the Atlantic, with which even modest winds would distort this tube. And on top of that, you're meant to be running trains through here at, what do they go for? 2,000 kilometers per hour. So any slight deviation on this being a completely straight track, then the trains will just plow straight through the side of the tunnel, and of course that'll be a disaster. But it turns out it's not even that bad, in that in my video I make it quite clear that the Atlantic Conveyor, the Gulf Stream, runs at about 6 kilometers per hour. And I just make the ballpark approximation that whatever, it's going to be about 1 kilometer per hour, which is the numbers I use for these calculations. And of course, this is going to be turbulent flow. It's going to be all over the place at different points in the tube, which will, this is completely impossible. So when we come back to here, let's what if we actually put in the real number of, or the more realistic number of 6 kilometers per hour? Well, all of a sudden this becomes 1,000 times by the square of the velocity, which is 6, so this is going to be 36. And this now isn't going to be the velocity that you need at the end isn't going to be the square root of 1,000. It's going to be the square root of 36,000, which is more or less 200, right? So that's 200 kilometers per hour, that one, which is, well, about 120 mile an hour wind or something. So at that point, this is, a 30 kilometer per hour wind would be a no-go. A 200 kilometer per hour, which is Gulf Stream type numbers, is an absolute no-go. And all right, my mistake was I had it as 1,000 kilometer per hour. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever to the conclusions. But, because I don't want us to be in a post-fact world, this is actually what it should be. There are a whole horde of people, most notably Elon Musk fans, can't quite figure out why, who will take any minor mistake and, whenever they do, they'll start spamming it as on my Twitter, which is kind of annoying, but whatever. Because I don't want to live in a post-fact world. Another one they spam regularly is did this video about, what were they? They were going to get an asteroid from the asteroid belt, bring it back to Earth, and then they were going to, from that asteroid, they were going to dangle a skyscraper into the Earth's atmosphere, so it would be a floating skyscraper. And this is just absolutely dumb on every conceivable goddamn level. So I made a busting video about it. And the first thing you need is what are the rough costs of getting an asteroid from out here to the Earth's orbit here? And I make the first approximation that whatever. This has an orbital velocity here, which will give you a kinetic energy. And you take a look at the kinetic energy here and the kinetic energy here, and then you get a difference in the kinetic energy, and that's roughly what you need for the transfer. And this is actually wrong, right? So what you've got here is you've got the potential energy of, the total energy is equal to the potential energy, which is basically how far you are from the, how far out of the gravitational well you are, plus the kinetic energy. And so there's this guy who writes this great blog post, which again people spam relentlessly, that this proves Thunderfoot doesn't understand basic physics, blah blah blah. And obviously on the back of this, they say that I'm wrong about everything about SpaceX. No, really, in 2018, Elon Musk did land one of his Dragon capsules on Mars. We all remember that, right? Anyway. And and the Hyperloop panned out so well, and so did the solar rooftop, the solar shingles, and the Tesla Semi, blah blah blah. Yeah, this is actually wrong, right? It's not that, it's that. Well, then you take a look at what difference does this make to the economical viability of this, and it's something like, this is a factor of 1,000, a factor of a million, a factor of a billion. It's roughly on those sorts of levels. The cost of moving an asteroid into Earth's orbit is 1 billion times too expensive to do, and you add in this factor here, and it's not 1 billion times too expensive. It's more like 500 million, which is like, yeah, well, that clearly shows that I'm completely wrong, even in the ballpark calculations. Anyway. And, this is, of course, of something where if it's 10% too expensive, then it's not economically viable and you go broke. So, that is my corrections, because there aren't many of these things. And a lot of the time, these are fundamentally wrong. I have to stress this, that not that one. This one is fundamentally wrong. Doesn't make any difference to the conclusions, of course. But, these are the examples that people will come up with when they're trying to defend Elon Musk to discredit me, that he makes these mistakes in his videos. But that's basically it, I think. There are some other minor mistakes, but like I was saying, there were shades of grey on some of these things. So because I care about not living in a post-fact world. No, it's not the world. This is me. This is my attempt to add some corrections to my videos. And if you thought it was awesome, this is going to go disastrously wrong. Trying to draw a thumb. Drop a thumbs up on it. And I will see you in the next video. And many thanks for watching.